adjustments and so on, and we'll get into that here in a second. But just some specifics. So if I'm in a large combo, these are the coaching points that we're talking about. And remember that large means that the thin man has no alignment whatsoever on him. Is this thick man, he's going to go through his individual aiming points. His aiming point, if we were going to the right and he were the right tackle, would be this inside number because the ball's coming up in here. So he's going to step for his aiming point, lead step. If that aiming point stays where it was, then go ahead and sustain that block, and that just goes back to that individual technique that we talked about. However, if the aiming point leaves, now you have to eye your window and work vertically. Don't stay on the track, but if he comes backside, slants inside on you, you don't want to keep just floating on that track. You are now going to get vertical and check this window, because when somebody leaves, somebody is going to come. And then you'll demeanor technique up to that aiming point of the next guy at second level. The thin man, he can go full on to this side. Okay, so now he's taking a lead step, and he's keeping his eye on that play side foot of the defensive lineman when he takes that step. He's keying that foot to see if that foot stays in the ground, then that's a good indication that he's going to be able to move up to the second level, because that probably means that this guy's going to stay outside. If he sees that inside foot wiggle, then he's got to be eyes up and ready for an aiming point that's coming into his play side gap on first level. So if the foot comes, now you have to get that aiming point of that defensive lineman. If the foot stays, now you get to eye the window, and now you're the guy that works vertical and gets into your window and demeanors up to the linebacker. Now the difference between the large and the small here, so now we're taking it back a bit. This is actually not a called combo for us. The combo that would be called would be between this guy and his buddy over here, okay, because this guy is actually thin and this guy is actually thick. So this guy right here is his responsibility. Now, this thick guy is on the left. He's going to have the same rules that any thick person would have. I need to lead step to the aiming point of the defensive lineman. Now, if these guys are backside, if this is the center and that's a backside shade, and we're saying the aiming point's over here, this guy's aiming point needs to get over here and not necessarily over there. Now, we're okay with the diagonal movement that we should get, and we just want him to come off and really wash all this on that angle. But essentially, he has to know that I'm trying ultimately to get my hat to that aiming point. Now, obviously, if this were the right guard and that were the center, now that's different. Now he'd just be going right there. So if it stays, sustain your block. If it leaves, eye the window and work up to your play side window. Now understand that this guy who is thick had a guy call out thin back here most likely, and so now if that guy were to come all the way across, which it's unlikely from a 2-eye, but if he did, then he would not work all the way here. He would work up to this window here, because that's what his combo had responsibility on. The thin man now, he'll take that lead step. Now that lead step's probably not going to gain any ground. It's probably going to be an up and down step that he takes. He's going to eye that inside foot that we had talked about earlier. If it comes, he has to abandon this guy. He's got to go to the trump card, which is play side gap occupancy by the first level defender. If the foot stays and that guy out here stays thick on his buddy, then he's going to throw a left arm flipper in this picture here. He's going to step with his right foot, and now his left foot and his left arm are going to go right up the middle of this guy's body, and he's literally trying to rip off that right-hand side of that guy's body. He's trying to open that up and really give this guy a good post up on that. Now, he's got to keep his right arm out of it. All right. If he turns his shoulders at all, he loses eyes on play side gap window, and now this guy can run through and make the play. So you have to be able to execute this technique by going vertical and throwing flipper with shoulders square and keeping your eyes on the aiming point of the guy that you're ultimately responsible for, but you're giving surface. So we talk about it going vertical. I make vertical lines in the drawings. In all reality, it really is more of a diagonal path that this combo ends up taking. But if you teach them the vertical nature of this movement, you'll live with a little bit of floating to the right. If you tell them that you're just getting on a diagonal track, these guys are going to have some gaps to be able to run through. You're never going to get hip to hip, and you really won't create good 2-on-1 combos. And so I think this is really probably the most important thing out of everything in terms of being able to establish 2-on-1 combos, but at the same time ultimately being responsible for your play side gap. Can't turn, all right? You can't step too far to the right. Up and down step. If it comes, you have to take it. Now he's on his own. But if it doesn't come, we really want to get that 3 surface on that guy right there with his eyes on there. Medium now is we don't know if it's going to end up being a large or a small. If it stays a medium, which a lot of the times it rarely does in these types of defenses, if it just were him staying there, then this guy would just block him because he's thick and that's his guy. This guy would step, see that no movement had happened, and he would work up. So that's very similar to everything else that we've talked about. Now, if this guy moves one way or another, which is more likely to happen, a couple things have to be considered. If you're in a full slanting defense and this guy goes to the right, he's now thick to the right, and so he's just going to take that over on the aiming point. That guy is his guy, and there's no questions asked. But you'd also have to assume that if that were the right tackle, that there's a center here with a nose on him who's also slanting to the right. And that's a tough block for the center who has to snap and then have to be able to block movement, and that's the point of attack. And so what we talk about with this guy here on a medium, and especially against defenses that we know that will slant or angle, is if he goes to the right, you can assume that he's going to the right on his slant. So now step, when that foot goes away, instead of allowing yourself to trail at all, really hinge down and be ready to throw a backside flipper right here, because it's really no different than if he's slanting hard to you than what it would be if that guy just started in what we would call small alignment right there. And so go ahead and hinge in and throw that, and that way we can get fit up on a 2-on-1 and work that guy to that guy's lap. And we really are patient with our 2-on-1 combos, and I think that's probably things that you've heard most people say, but the goal is to really take the defensive lineman and put him in his lap. And I can do that with two guys. All right, it's harder with this one guy. All right, you got to be a guy to be able to block person one-on-one. But when you have two guys on one guy, there's really no excuse for you to not be able to get backwards movement, vertical movement, and put that guy in his lap. And so now if this guy were to come inside, your assumption, if it was a full slanting defense, then would be that the nose went backside as well. And so now this guy who has first level occupancy has to sell out. He has to go. He has to get that aiming point. Now what we started to run into a lot is this redirect technique where he steps, slants inside, he takes his own step, he gets into the hip of this guy who's creating this extra space. That's really hard for this guy to track down. And really when he comes to the left, it's this guy's responsibility. He has to block him. So that redirect technique really forced us to implement this whole, when you start from a medium alignment and he steps back, more than just going vertical, you have to throw the backside flipper. And so really, no matter what, one of these two guys is going to throw a backside flipper, whether he goes that way and it's him throwing the backside flipper for this guy, or whether he goes that way and now it's him throwing the backside flipper with his left arm to work that 2-on-1 combo. And so that's really how we've tried to accommodate some of these slanting and angling and redirecting defenses, and still be able to establish some 2-on-1 combos. But remember that we are not turning our heads and we're not turning our shoulders. We are trying to stay square.